Let's start. Welcome everybody. Good morning to the second day of the ninth week workshop. Today we start the day with the presentation of Professor Natalia Fabra, who is very welcome. Natalia Fabra, as you know, is full professor of economics at the Universidad Carlos III de Madrid, where she is the head of Energy Ecolab. She also is the principal investigator of the ERC Consolidator project, current tools and policy challenges in electricity markets. Natalia also works in the field of industrial organization with emphasis on energy and environmental economics and regulation and competition policy. Furthermore, in 2014, she was recognized with the prize for the best young Spanish economist of Sabadell Herrero Prize. As a scholar, she has published in the top journals such as American Economic Review, RAND, International Journal of Industrial Organization, with more than 2,000 citations. Therefore, it is an honor for us, your attendance, Natalia, Professor Fabra, to this workshop, and we are sure we are going to learn a lot and to enjoy with your talk. From both point of view, the academic and the public policy, the policy implication point of view. Since her talk is about an hour and a little bit more, we think that it would be nice to ask her the question we have during the talk. So you can raise the hand, and then we can give you your turn to make this seminar as much similar as possible as a face-to-face seminar. Moreover, since talk to a camera an hour is hard and tough, she would really appreciate to have our camera on in order to see people behind this camera. So, Professor Fabra, Natalia, thank you very much for accepting our invitation. It's an honor. Now it's your turn. Thank you.
Thank you so much, José-Manuel. It's really my pleasure. I'll be talking about public policies for the energy transition. Probably if you compare that to the title that was posted on the program, it's a bit different. I really wanted to make sure that this is a truly wide seminar. And as I already told José-Manuel, I think this is a wonderful acronym, because I really think of myself as doing industrial organization that is relevant for public policy. And when we talk about the energy transition, we are certainly talking about public policies. It's clear that the word public policy is a big word, and it encompasses many different areas in economics. Let me just mention that yesterday the European Commission, the DG Competition, organized, I would say, an extremely interesting debate as to whether competition policy, which is one of these public policies for the energy transition, is fit for the purpose of supporting the Green Deal. So we had discussions regarding merger control, antitrust, state aid, innovation policy. This was a clear example of how the wide area of policies can be discussed among different scholars, lawyers, economists, to really try to make policy and design policy that is fit for the purpose of improving people's life. And certainly when we are talking about the energy transition, when we are talking about the Green Deal, when we are talking about decarbonizing our economies, there is certainly no better and probably no more important goal than to do this. I would say this is our generation's challenge. So during this hour talk, I certainly do not aim to cover all these policies. I will just be focusing on two issues that reflect the work that I have been doing in two related projects. One is more public economics kind of work, and the other is more industrial organization kind of work. So let me start with the broad picture. We are talking about the energy transition. You all know what the energy transition is, but it's good to keep this in mind because we are truly facing a huge challenge, and probably this picture provides some illustration of what this challenge implies. What this is showing is the path of carbon emissions reductions that we have to achieve since today until 2050. 30 years to achieve a major overhaul of our economies, because when we are talking about reducing carbon emissions, we are talking about changing the production processes of all sectors in the economy, changing how we move, changing how we live, changing how we consume. The energy sector is certainly not the only sector contributing to climate change. It's part of the problem, but I would say that nowadays is probably part of the solution, one of the main parts of the solution. Essentially, in the power sector, we are going to be producing clean electricity once we clean it up by introducing renewables, and this clean electricity is going to serve to decarbonize all the sectors of the economy, notably transport and buildings that cannot use renewables directly, at least as directly as we can use renewables to produce electricity. So what you can see is that essentially by 2040, our electricity sectors have to be carbon-free. And this is, as I was saying, a huge challenge. During the second part of my talk, I'll be discussing how we can achieve that. So the first part of my talk is going to be more general, and it's going to be comparing two alternative policies to achieve these emissions reductions. There's consensus regarding the need to reduce carbon emissions, but there's no unanimity as to how we have to achieve that. In this work, what we do is we compare two leading policies that have been advocated in the debate. One of them argues that if we are to reduce carbon emissions, we have to give up growth. We have to give up growth, and sometimes there's even people who say that we have to degrow. That is, we have to achieve negative GDP growth, because growth is what is causing carbon emissions, and therefore if we are to tackle climate change, we have to reduce emissions by reducing growth. The alternative strategy is rather to say we cannot give up growth, we simply have to grow differently. And this different growth has to involve heavy investments in energy efficiency so that we are able to consume the same amount of output and welfare with less energy consumption. And we also have to invest in low carbon technologies, because these technologies are going to allow us to keep on producing and keep on consuming while generating fewer emissions. The question is, how can we compare these two strategies? And what we do in the paper, and certainly we are omitting many other issues, we are leaving them aside, in order to focus on the true cost of these two strategies. How can we compare them? Well, what we do is that we compute the cost of carbon that is implicit in these two strategies. That is, how much does it cost in terms of GDP or in terms of euro invested in these low carbon technologies to reduce 1 ton of CO2, okay? And for that matter, we need to understand how much growth reduction we need per ton of carbon abated. We are to understand the cost of the first strategy. And regarding the cost of the second strategy, we need to understand how much low carbon investment we need and how much that it costs in order to reduce 1 ton of CO2. So the result that I'm going to be presenting here today come from a very recent paper that I've written together with Aitor La Cuesta from Bank of Spain and Mateu Sousa, who is working with me at Carlos III, and it's called Competing Strategies for Carbon Abatement, Degrowth versus Decoupling. So what exactly do we do? Well, not surprisingly, we make use of, I would say, the largest or one of the most important natural experiments that unfortunately we have recently experienced, all of us, which is COVID. COVID has had a major effect on our economies. We have seen that our economies have essentially stopped for a while, at least regarding the Spanish economy during the lockdown period. And the fact that we have stayed at home, we have not used any means of transport. This has had a very important impact on total emissions. But at the same time, we have seen that this has caused a great reduction in GDP. So somehow these experiments allow us to see, well, we've reduced growth, but this has also allowed us to reduce emissions. What has been the cost of this growth reduction during COVID in the Spanish economy? At the same time, to address the second issue, we ask ourselves, could we have had the same amount of carbon abatement without the pandemic? And in order to achieve so, how much should we have invested in low carbon? And therefore, this allows us to compare the cost of the two. So essentially what we do in the paper, and here I'm just giving a quick overview of the results, we need to construct this counterfactual scenario. It's not enough to say in 2020 as compared to 2019, emissions have been reduced by this much. This is clearly not the proper approach. What we should rather do is compute the counterfactual emissions. That is, all else equal, how much would emissions had fallen? And this is very important because, for instance, if we focus on a very polluting sector, which is the power sector, well, in 2020, it was already planned that the coal plants would be phased out. So these emissions reductions would have been achieved even without the pandemic. So if we really want to understand by how much have emissions been reduced because of the pandemic, it would not be correct to just look at the change year to year. The same thing occurs with the GDP. We need to understand by how much has GDP fallen because of the pandemic, not just look at how much has it fallen year to year. And for that matter, we need to build the counterfactual GDP. For the same reason, we need to understand how much should we have invested in low carbon technologies to achieve the same amount of CO2 reductions had there not been a pandemic. The pandemic has implied, for instance, that electricity demand has been falling, so the impact of these low carbon investments would not have been the same with and without the pandemic. In the analysis, we take into account the emissions of all sectors in the economy, but our analysis is more detailed when it comes to the power sector. The power sector is relevant not only because it's clearly part of a problem and part of the solution, as I said before, but also it allows us to perform a very detailed exercise because of the availability of very detailed data, because we know the market rules and therefore we are better able to simulate the market in order to understand these counterfactual scenarios and therefore the associated changes. Is there any questions so far, or is it okay?
No, hey, Natalia.
Yeah.
Natalia.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hola, soy Asier.
Hola, Asier. How are you doing?
I'm good. So just a couple of questions on the framing, just to understand what you're doing. So so one is, it seemed from the previous slide that you're gonna be calculating the cost per unit of carbon reduction.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that's suggesting that this somehow is a constant number, independent of the the reduction of carbon amount that you are thinking of. I assume not. It's probably just an aggregate ratio that you're gonna take, no?
Yeah, we are just gonna take an aggregate ratio. You're absolutely right. This ratio need not be the same at all stages of the energy transition. That's clearly the case, and it's not the same, if the growth reduction affects some sectors of the economy or others. It's not the same across countries, because the growth reduction in some countries might affect some sectors more than others. So probably those cross-country and across-time comparisons are not suitable, but we are, say, at a cross-section. We are going to be comparing at the same moment of time, in the same country, at the same stage of the energy transition, what has been the cost of reducing emissions through degrowth versus what would have been the cost of reducing emissions by the same amount through low carbon investments.
Okay, great. The other thing, Natalia, is I would have thought that the way to frame the problem would be slightly different. I mean, maybe perhaps this is the dual or something. I would have thought that I would have had some sort of welfare criterion function, and then I would weight one route versus the other, because all the indirect effects of going in one way versus the other may be radically different. I mean, I agree that with the particular target you have in mind, that's fine. But then, there may be a lot of other indirect effects that you're not taking into account, right?
Again, I fully agree, and this is very important, because when we reduce growth, not only we are reducing emissions, we are also having other major impacts that have to be taken into account. And when we invest in low carbon investments through the multiplier effects, we are also achieving other benefits that we are not taking into account. So this is why I'm saying that the comparison is just based on what is the implicit cost of carbon, right? The other analysis would probably require a different type of approach, and I even dare to say that it's probably not very feasible to take into account, all the general equilibrium effects that are triggered by these two very different strategies. So we need to focus, and our focus is this one, but we do not claim that this is the only these are the only effects that should be taken into account. But this is certainly one dimension of the issue. How much does it cost to reduce emissions per ton of carbon abated, following one route or following the other?
Thanks, Natalia.
You're welcome. So let me give you a quick overview of what we do, and this will probably make things clearer. The first thing that we do, and I said that the power sector is where we put our focus, is counterfactual demand in the power sector. And for this purpose, we use machine learning using past hourly consumption data. So the vertical line that you see there, this is the start of 2020. So what we do is we train the model with past data, and we predict what would have been demand during 2020. So what you see there, these blue triangles are real demands, and the red dots are counterfactual demand. As you can see, our model during 2019, it performs relatively well, and during 2020, right around the time of the when the lockdown measures were introduced, then our counterfactual demand is much higher, therefore providing a measure of what has been the true in demand because of the pandemic. This exercise, this prediction exercise, is done at the hourly level. It has to be very precise, because if we need to understand how would have the electricity market performs under this counterfactual demand, because electricity markets are organized on an hourly basis, we really need this hourly detail. As you know, demand has a very strong seasonal component. There's many different generation technologies, so it's not just enough to have, say, daily demand, because things can be quite different, and the impact on emissions can be quite different depending on how the hourly demand patterns change. So with that detail that I didn't bring it here, we use those counterfactual hourly demand estimates and the real hourly demand values, and we simulate the whole electricity market. So we have a very detailed model to simulate what would have been the electricity market outcomes under different scenarios. So essentially in our simulations, the only thing that we change, we keep all the inputs unchanged, that is the price of gas, the price of CO2, the amount of renewable resources, and all is equal. And the only variable that we move is the amount of total demand. And this allows us to compute the simulated scenario with realized demand and the simulated scenario with counterfactual demands. And here in these two figures, what you can see is total demand from January 1st, 2020 until the 1st of October 2020, which is the period of our simulation, how that demand has been served by the different technologies. As you can see on the left-hand side, realized demand is well lower than the counterfactual demand, and therefore the amount of emissions implicit in the realized demand scenario is much lower than the amount of emissions in the counterfactual demand scenario, and the comparison of the two allow us to compute indeed how much have emissions fallen because of the pandemic. For the other sectors of the economy, we haven't performed such a detailed analysis. Indeed, we borrow the estimates performed by Carbon Monitor that give for the Spanish economy data on the emissions reductions in all the other main polluting sector, that is aviation, ground transport, industry, and residential. So if we put their emission reduction estimates for those sectors plus our emission reduction estimates for the power sector, then we find that CO2 emissions have fallen by 15% during COVID. In order to compute the implicit cost of carbon of the degrowth strategy, we also need some counterfactual GDP. And we estimated using similar techniques, clearly with poor data, because here we only have quarterly GDP. And if we put together the amount of emission reductions and the cost of this GDP growth reduction, then we find that the implicit cost of carbon is above 6,000 euro per ton, which is a huge number. It means that we have lost more than 6,000 euro per ton of emission reduction that we have achieved during this period. Instead, for the decoupling strategy, what we do is we say, okay, suppose that demand, electricity demand, and here we focus only on the electricity sector. Suppose that electricity demand had not fallen because of the pandemic. Suppose that the pandemic had not occurred. So we are working with this estimated counterfactual demand. How many low carbon investments would have been needed in order to achieve the same amount of emission reductions that we have seen in the power sector because of the pandemic. So in this table, I'm aware that the numbers are a bit little. I hope you can see them properly. So with a very detailed data provided by the International Renewable Energy Agency about the cost of solar and wind investments in Spain for 2019. So these are very recent data. We compute how many investments in solar photovoltaics and how many investments in wind would have been needed to achieve emission reductions of around 4 million tons, which is the amount of emission reductions that we have seen because of the pandemic. We compute the investment cost of that, and therefore we can conclude what is the implicit cost of carbon of that strategy. And we can, run several robustness tests as we have done. We can consider several energy mixes, whether we invest everything in solar, or whether we invest everything in wind, or whether we go for a hybrid. And no matter what we do, the implicit cost of carbon is well below the figure that I gave you before. It's between 57 euro per ton if we go for solar investments, or 126 if we go for wind. So as you can see, that the comparison is truly astonishing. We could, as Asier was mentioning here, take into account all the other indirect effects that come together with these two strategies, but it's clear that at least when it comes to the objective of reducing emissions, the efficiency of these two alternatives is very different and astonishingly different, let me say.
Natalia,
Yep.
sorry, we have a couple of hand raises. The first, I think, is Ben. Yeah,
Hello.
the first who has raised the hand is Ben.
I have a question. What you estimate with the first strategy is the average cost, right? I mean, it's a huge reduction of GDP.
No. So you mean the investment cost?
No, the in the slide before where you calculated the 6,500 euros per ton.
Yeah.
So this is the average. I mean, if you do this, if you would follow this strategy, of course, you would not decrease GDP by such an amount, right? You would then perhaps decrease on those activities that are less productive. So I think the marginal cost would be much lower, right?
But you have to take into account not only the activities that are less productive, but also see what is the correlation between their emissions rate. When we reduce growth, which is what has happened during the pandemic, it's true that the composition effect can be very relevant as to how much GDP you lose and how many emissions you lose. This is something that we cannot choose in the analysis. It's a natural experiment. We have seen this GDP growth. It's clear that it has not affected equally all the sectors of the economy. Some of them have been more affected than others, but I'm not really sure because I haven't done the analysis as to what is the relationship between the efficiency and the emission rates of the various sectors of the economy. So you could find that GDP reduction affects all the sectors, but this might not, or I mean, it's unclear whether the effect on this ratio is going to be on the upside or on the downside. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. But I still wonder if you reduce or stop GDP growth or less growth, if this would be really the cost. I mean, then you could perhaps choose.
This is the only thing that I can claim is that this has been the cost during the pandemic, given the composition of the degrowth that we have seen. It's true that, for instance, during the pandemic, because we have stopped moving, we have seen a strong reduction in a very polluting sector, which is the transportation sector, including the aviation sector. So I would say that, if anything, it makes me think that if we reduce growth, with a different type of strategy affecting other type of sectors, we might not achieve such an emission reduction as the one we have seen because of the pandemic. But this is certainly something that I cannot provide an answer because I haven't explored that. All I can say is that these are estimates for the emissions reduction, and these are estimates for the GDP reduction that can be associated to the pandemic, and these are the resulting costs. It has been very costly to reduce emissions through GDP reduction.
Okay, now Asier.
Natalia, very quickly on because I don't want to stop you from continuing, but in the slide on the alternative route on the yes, exactly, the decoupling strategy you call it. So I guess there's the cost of all the infrastructure that you would not be using, but it's already in place. I mean, for this very short period of time, perhaps 1 year, or I mean, I don't know exactly how long you're taking it. maybe it's not too big, but there must be depreciation costs, fixed costs, and all kinds of costs of all the structure that that the energy sector has in place that has not been using. No, I mean, that must be relevant, and I think it should be counted here.
Yeah, if I understand correctly your question, maybe what you mean is if we deploy these solar investments and wind investments, this is not the only investment that we have to put in place. Probably
Yes.
we also have to develop the power grid.
Yes, and I mean, not only that, Natalia, but like, you know, if you have nuclear or other ways of producing that you're gonna shut down because you're gonna be using this,
Yeah.
that's gonna still have fixed costs that you're gonna have to be
Those are
paying,
sunk
no?
costs. Those are sunk costs, and therefore I should not be including them into this
Okay,
analysis.
so the sector is such that anything that so if you change completely to the new green stuff, there's no deep, like, you know, it's not, the scrap value is not something that you would care about. You see what I mean? Like, I mean,
I see what you mean. Whereas I buy your argument that here I should be summing the extra investments that I need to be able, for instance, to transmit, you know, the power of these stations, these installations that are going to be located who knows where, and I need to be in the power grid. This, I think, and I fully agree with you that I need to include it here. But about the value of the investments that are sunk, I don't think that should be included there because those are costs that have already been incurred. If anything, there is the cost of the variable cost of those stations that I'm not going to be incurring, and that's a benefit because the cost of producing electricity with solar and wind in terms of the variable cost is much lower than the variable cost of producing electricity out of gas, which is mainly what it's going to be. So if anything, I should be adding that to the benefit side and not to the cost side. To be clear, here where it says investment cost is taking into account both investment costs plus the operation and maintenance cost of these installations.
Right.
So we could fine tune these numbers and we could, you know, include some components and not others, but for sure the difference is still going to be astonishing. So we are talking about, you know, a factor of 100. So, you know, you might claim, well, it's a bit more expensive than this. It might be even less. So I'm going to show you right now slides of the renewable auction that took place in Spain just last week that provided much lower estimates for the investment cost of these technologies than we thought we had. So if anything, I think I have to reduce these numbers, which would make the comparison even stronger. But this is just an illustration to show that when we say we have to reduce emissions and we have to become climate neutral by 2050, whereas the objective is clear, it's not so clear which are the strategies that we need to follow, and the cost of those strategies can be very different. The objective is not only to decarbonize our economies, but to do this at least cost with the most benefits that we can get for the society. And I'm fully convinced that the way to go, and this is just an illustration of that, is to change the way we produce energy, the way we consume energy, and other goods in the economy, so that we can keep on growing in a more sustainable way rather than giving up growth altogether. So if the way to go is to promote investments in renewables, if we agree that is the way to go under that assumption, that's not the end of the story, because then we have to decide, okay, so how to do so? And here I go down to the micro level, and I ask, well, if we want to promote renewables, how should we support them? How are we supporting them in practice? And the way we are doing it, is this the right approach or not? So let me just give you a very quick overview of the instruments that are commonly used in practice to provide support for renewables. Essentially, we can rely on two broad families of regulatory instruments. One is to regulate the quantity, and the other one is to regulate the price. So an instrument that is based on quantity regulation is, for instance, auctions. So the regulator sets what is the objective amount of capacity that they want to procure in the market. So they run an auction for that amount, and bidders, that is the investors, the firms, they submit the price at which they're willing to build up all that capacity in aggregate, right? So through bidding in these auctions, the prices for these new investments are set. Another instrument that is based on quantity regulation is tradable quotas. So, for instance, the regulator says, I want this amount of renewables. Whoever invests in renewables, they can sell some certificates. The buyers, they need to buy those certificates, and the price of these certificates is providing an extra revenue that is supporting investments in renewables. The alternative is to rely on price instruments, and this has been quite popular, at least during the first phases of the renewable deployment. Essentially, the regulator would set the price, say which price is it going to be paid to every unit of electricity produced out of renewables. And here again, as everywhere, there's different types we can rely on, either feed-in tariffs or feed-in premiums, that is given an extra premium on top of the market price that these producers would get. Even within these families, there's a very important dimension, which is the dimension that we are focusing on, which is whether this support is technology neutral, that is, all the various renewable technologies are treated equally, be it solar, wind, biomass, you name it, or whether these support schemes are technology specific. That is, whether we give different levels of support or whether we use different instruments depending on the type of technology that we're dealing with, but we use this technology specific, say, label as a more generic label to refer to any type of observable characteristic on which the regulator can base this support. We can also refer to location, so treat differently installations that are located in the south or in the north, or treat differently small and large installations, or any other dimension that the regulation can be contingent on. And in between these two extremes of either technology specific or technology neutral, there are several hybrid schemes that essentially rely on a technology neutral approach that is being corrected some way or another. For instance, there's the so-called technology banding. So this would be a technology neutral auction in which some technologies, they get a handicap so as to allow them to compete on a level field with the other technologies. Or we might also rely on a technology neutral approach while setting minimum quantities for certain technologies to make sure that at least they get that allocation. So an example of these instruments has been used in Spain just last week. So the regulator decided to auction 3,000 megas. And for you to have a sense of what that means, this is approximately 5% of all the renewable capacity that we have to procure during the current decade. So the government is expecting that every year we add 6,000 megas to the electricity system. So these 3,000 megas represent this 5%. So they decided to allocate this through a technology neutral auction, meaning all the different bidders, regardless of their renewable technology, they could participate in this auction, but they established a minimum quantity that would be allocated for sure to solar PV and to wind. The auction format that was used was the pay-as-bid system, which means that if a bidder offers a price of, I don't know, 20 euro per megawatt hour, and if this bid is a winning bid, that's the price that this bidder is going to get rather than the market clearing price. what these auctions were auctioning off was a contract of 12 years duration. It means that during a 12 years duration since the start of the contract, which is 2023, to give time for the developers to invest in these new plants, during 12 years, they would get the price that was set through the auction. And after these 12 years, they would be selling their electricity in the wholesale electricity market at whatever the price will be. So let me give you just an overview of the results that were obtained during this auction. So what you can see here is the different bids of the different winning producers. We cannot see the bids that didn't win the auction because this information has not been made public. So you can see the prices that each of them got, and the difference between the blue and the red dots and triangles. The red ones are the solar installations, and the blue ones are the wind. As you can see, there were many more solar projects that won the auction. In particular, solar won 2,000 megas and wind won 1,000 megas. And this was the technology neutral outcome. That is, all the bids, as you can see them here, were ranked from low to high and up to 3,000. The result was precisely the same. And I think this is just a matter of a coincidence. The result was the same as if this minimum quota had been binding, because wind just got the minimum quota that had been reserved for it. This is just a figure showing only the winning wind bids, and this is just a figure showing the winning solar bids. This is a figure showing the firms that won this auction. As you can see, this was a very competitive auction. There were 84 participants. The total amount that was offered was above 9,000. That is that was auctioned off, and there was quite a lot of fragmentation among the solar winners, not so much among the wind winners, because a single company, Capital Energy, got 600 megas, which is more or less 20% of the total amount that was being auctioned off. So this is something that this topic, essentially, whether it's desirable to treat technologies in a neutral manner, or whether it's better to use a technology-specific approach, is a topic on which I've been working together with Juan Pablo Montero, and we have just released a very recent version of our paper. So this is a theory paper with some simulations. Let me go through the main ingredients of the model for you to have a sense of the trade-offs that are involved when we are deciding whether to treat technologies in a neutral fashion or to use some type of technology-specific approach. Are there any questions so far, or before I go into the model?
Super quickly, Natalia, just to understand the figure with the prices for solar and wind. I'm just so surprised that I mean the production costs must be super different, but still.
Yeah. So investment costs probably they are the same, but the amount of output that you can get at the very different locations is very different, because it's not the same thing having a site, say, in the south of Spain where there is a lot of sun, versus having a site in the north of Spain which is not as sunny, right? So here what they need to recover is their average cost, and the average cost is the ratio between the investment cost and total production. So this variation in total production, because of the differences in the availability of the natural resource, implies that costs are very different. Keep in mind also that here we have bidders with different amounts of information. I found that the result of the auction was surprising for many reasons. The first one that I didn't mention was that the price was super competitive. So the average price was around 25. Okay, so if you compute the quantity weighted average price of this auction, around 25. And for you to have a sense of what this really means, the average price in the wholesale electricity market during the last 10 years has been around 46. So we are talking about, a very substantial price reduction as compared to the price we would be paying for these installations if they were sold at wholesale electricity market prices. So I think this is very remarkable.
Yeah, I agree. But so, Natalia, I was referring to, sorry, I didn't explain myself very well. I was referring to the fact that how come the price of solar and wind are so close to each other? I mean,
yeah, that's something that I also found very remarkable, because solar investments these days, they are cheaper than investments. So I think everybody was very surprised about this outcome. Yeah. And I've been thinking about this, and my understanding is that a very important factor is the fact that the contract that has been auctioned off has been quite short. So 12 years is quite short, taking into account that the lifetime of these plants is around 30 years. So this means that during 18 years, these plants are going to get the wholesale electricity market price. And the average price that is going to be captured by wind installation is probably going to be much higher than the average price that is going to be captured by solar installations. Why is this the case? Because solar production is very much concentrated during the central hours of the day between sunrise and sunset. It means that during those hours, because there's going to be so much solar production, prices are going to be much lower than the average market price that we are going to see across the day. And keep in mind that wind availability is quite random. So probably they're going to be producing at night when prices are going to be much higher. So probably the fact that these two technologies, the bids of these two technologies were much closer together as to what we would have expected, has to do with the fact that after the end of the contract, wind expects much higher prices than solar. This is so far the explanation that I can give to this outcome, but it's certainly something that has been very remarkable and that was not expected.
Thanks, Natalia.
You're welcome. Something else that I found quite remarkable, but probably something that we will not see happening in the future auctions, because keep in mind, this is only the first, but every year there's going to be a series of auctions. So it's very important that we really understand what happened in this one so that we can update the design of the future auctions, is that this is a pay-as-bid auction. When we analyze pay-as-bid auctions in theory, the expected equilibrium outcome is that most bidders, they try to guess what the market clearing price is going to be. So in this case, around 28, and they try to bid up close to that level. And as you can see, there was quite a lot of variation in the bids. So there were bids at 18, whereas it was clear that the market clearing price was not going to be 18. So probably here we have bidders with different amount of information, bidders with different degrees of risk aversion that explains why this bid is steeper and not as flat as we would have expected. So let's see if in the future auctions there's some learning in that respect, and we find these flatter curves. For the consumer and for the Spanish electricity market, it was great that this supply function was steeper, because it means that we are paying less to some of those producers. So if that is okay, let me jump into the model that I've developed with Juan Pablo. And this is the simplest version of the model we could think of to try to capture what is the trade-off between going technology neutral or going technology specific. Keeping in mind the design of the Spanish auction, note that this auction is somehow of a hybrid, because the outcome is technology neutral unless these minimum constraints are binding. If those constraints are binding, it is as if we are following a technology specific approach, because the allocation would have been the one that the regulator has decided ex ante on this minimum allocation, but we don't know whether that allocation is going to be binding or not, and if it is not, then the outcome is technology neutral. So it's somewhere in between, and it's quite interesting to think about this decision that the regulator made. For that purpose, even though we started working on it a long time ago, that is well before even the regulator designed the auction, I think it's very useful to have this very simple frameworks. So think of two technologies, 1 and 2, which could be wind and solar. We have a continuum of risk-neutral price-taking suppliers of each technology. If we put together the cost of these various price-taking suppliers, then our assumption is that we would have some type of quadratic cost, where this parameter CT is commonly known, and this can capture ex-ante asymmetries in the cost of the various technologies, whereas this theta T is a cost shock, which is technology specific, and which is somehow capturing the asymmetric information that the regulator has. So these cost shocks are white noise. They have certain variance denoted by sigma, and we allow them to be either positively or negatively correlated as captured by the parameter rho. So whenever we invest in these technologies, we get some social benefits. You can refer to carbon abatement, as we were discussing in the first part of the talk, or you can think of any other social benefits that are triggered by these investments. And importantly, we are assuming that these two investments are perfect substitutes, in the sense that the regulator only cares about the aggregate amount of investment and is not really concerned as to whether this investment, as to the composition of these investments. We make this for simplicity, because if we introduce some ex-ante asymmetries in the social benefits of these two technologies, this would be an extra force that would favor the technology-specific approach, and somehow we want to show that the technology-specific approach can be optimal even if we are dealing with technologies that are perfect substitutes from the benefit side. I think there's a question.
Yeah, Natalia, before going to the next slide, we have a question by Andrei Tachenko. Andrei?
Yes, I have a question to the previous slide, Natalia. So what is the C double prime here? Is it derivative, the second derivative, or just constant? C double prime in the aggregate cost function.
That is the slope. That is a parameter. That is the slope of the cost function. It's just a parameter.
Okay.
It's an important assumption that makes our life simpler, that the slope of those cost functions are the same across the two technologies. And this is something that is common in the literature. For instance, in Weissman, there's the same assumption. Otherwise, the model is much more difficult to solve. So our regulator wants to maximize expected welfare, and importantly, in our welfare function, not only we have the social benefits and the cost of these investments, but we also have the social cost of the payments that we give to firms. So here the implicit assumption is that our public budget is limited, so it has a shallow cost, or the implicit understanding as well could well be that in order to get these funds, we need to use distortionary taxes somewhere else in the economy. So giving away or paying for these investments is costly, and therefore the regulator, not only she wants to reduce costs in order to increase efficiency, but also she doesn't want to give away many rents to firms, because this also comes at a cost. Okay, so in the paper, the first thing that we do is we characterize the optimal mechanism, and then we look at the various mechanisms that are used in practice, including the technology neutral approach and the technology specific approach, and we see how far away they are from the optimal mechanism. Okay, so the optimal mechanism is a product mix auction. This term was coined by Klemperer when he was designing the liquidity auction for the central bank in England, where banks could provide either a strong or weak collateral. So something similar we find in this setting regarding the optimal mechanism. In particular, the optimal mechanism involves the regulator ex ante announcing technology-specific demands. So these demands depend on the valuation of those investments, but they also depend on this parameter lambda. So as you can see, how much the regulator is willing to procure from each technology depends on lambda. if lambda was 0, then the price that she would be willing to offer for both technologies would be exactly the same, equal to the marginal valuation. But whenever lambda enters into the picture, because we care about total payments, that willingness to pay by the regulator is distorted. In particular, she's willing to pay less to the technology that has a higher quantity allocation in order to reduce the total payments that are left with the producers. This optimal mechanism is technology specific. As you can see on the left-hand side, that optimal price is technology specific, and importantly, the allocation that comes out of this optimal mechanism is distorting what would be the cost minimizing way to invest a given total quantity Q. And again, the reason why we distort this cost minimizing allocation is precisely to reduce payments. If we go to the mechanisms that are being used in practice, we cannot see anywhere regulators using something close to these optimal mechanisms. They use simpler mechanisms, and therefore we want to understand, rather than why are they not using an optimal mechanism, which would probably require a different approach. Rather, we take reality as given and say, well, given that they use these simpler mechanisms, how do they compare? How do they compare among them, and how do they compare to the optimal mechanism? So here, and let me just, for the sake of this presentation in the paper, we also analyze hybrid approaches. Let me just tell you about the technology neutral approach and the technology specific approach. The technology neutral approach simply has the auctioneer choosing the total amount Q that she wants to procure, and given that total quantity Q, then the market through the auction will determine what is the market clearing price that is going to be paid to all the technologies and what is going to be the allocation to these two technologies. To the contrary, if the regulator follows a technology-specific approach, the regulator has to choose the quantity allocation to each technology, and then he's going to run two separate auctions, one for wind and one for solar, and each auction is going to determine the technology-specific price for these two technologies. So under these simpler mechanisms, the regulator cannot extract all the asymmetric information from the bidders, and this for sure faces the regulator with a rent efficiency trade-off. What do I mean with a rent efficiency trade-off? Well, a technology-neutral approach is very good for cost efficiency, because essentially the quantities that are going to be finally allocated to one technology or the other adjust to the different cost shocks that the regulator cannot observe. So the outcome for sure is efficient from the cost efficiency side, but it can give rise to high rents as the low-cost producers, they get the marginal price in that market, and therefore this can give rise to overcompensation. Instead, if the regulator follows a technology-specific approach, she has an extra degree of freedom because she can play around with the allocation of one technology and the other, and she can use that freedom in order to reduce rents, even if that comes at a cost of reducing productive efficiency. Because we are running out of time, let me jump away from the theory. And let me show you the simulations that we had.
You have another 15 minutes.
Ah, okay. I thought you wanted me to finish at 1. So you will have to see the model. Probably with the details, it's going to be clear. Thank you, José-Manuel. So let's think what happens in a technology neutral auction. Okay. So as I said before, the regulator chooses the total quantity. In Spain, that was 3,000, right? And then we let the bidders bid. And if the market is perfectly competitive, as we are assuming in the baseline model, what we are going to have is that the allocation of the two technologies are going to be such that the marginal cost of these two technologies are equalized. and the price is therefore equal to the marginal cost of these two technologies. So if we look at what that it implies in terms of how much I allocate to technology 1 and how much I allocate to technology 2, essentially what we see is that technology 1 is the ex-ante low-cost technology. The ex-ante low-cost technology gets half of the total quantity plus one term, and that term that is simply reflecting the ex-ante asymmetries between these two technologies. So if technology 1 is really less expensive than technology 2, it's going to get a bonus. And then we have this term, which is simply reflecting these cost shocks. So if the cost shocks are such that technology 1 is really less costly than technology 2, this bonus will be even larger. Okay. So let's compare that. If we can see that graphically. So if these are the cost function of these two technologies, this is the total quantity that is going to be allocated. This line is the horizontal sum of these two functions. So this is the aggregate supply function. This would be the market clearing price at which the marginal cost of these two technologies are equalized. Therefore, this would be the price that is going to be paid to the two technologies, and these are the payments that these two technologies get in a technology-neutral market. Let's see how different are things if we go for a technology-specific approach. In this case, the regulator has to choose the two quotas, and the markets and the two markets, which are separated markets, will deliver the two different prices. So now what we find is that each price is going to be equal to the marginal cost of each technology. So there's not an equalization of marginal cost across technologies. What we find is that the regulator is going to choose these ex-ante allocations so as to maximize its welfare function, which implies that she's going to equate, or she's going to determine the allocations in order to equate the marginal social cost across these two technologies. The marginal social cost taking into account the impact that this allocation also has on the payments that these two technologies are going to get. Okay, so in each, on the left and on the left-hand side and the right-hand side of this equality, you have the marginal social cost of each technology. And please note two things. We have this term here. This term is the marginal payment that I give to technology 1 when I increase a little bit its quota. Note that if this alpha term was 0, because we didn't care about payments, indeed we would get that marginal cost would be equalized across technologies. If lambda is positive, it means that the final allocation is going to be such that not even ex-ante are the marginal cost of these two technologies equalized. The other thing to note in this expression...
Sorry,
yeah.
Carolina is asking in the chat that do suppliers know exactly their own theta?
Yes, they do. They know theta, but the regulator doesn't know theta. José-Manuel?
Yep. Now I'm not seeing the PPT.
No. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah, because somehow it took I don't know if it was an hour, the limit or something, it took me out, so I need to join again.
No, but I'm seeing.
No, you are already in the meeting.
Yeah.
I'm in the meeting through the other computer, but not through the one that I'm using. It's having a problem.
No, in both, because we are seeing you from two cameras.
Yeah, I think the problem is that the presentation has moved, but you are now time. You have the presentation.
You have to close when the connections, Natalia, because now you are here into. Okay.
You can go now.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you.
I left the computer where I was sharing the slides because it didn't seem to be working.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yeah. We can hear you and we
Yeah.
can see you. So, but now we are seeing you through the other computer. We have changed the view.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, I'm very sorry about that, but the other computers seem to have thrown me away of the meeting for some reason.
Okay. So,
But we cannot see your presentation right now.
You cannot see my presentation, and you will not be able to see it. I'm afraid.
if you want, I can.
Can you share it?
Yeah, I'm going to look for it and.
I'll be very quick. I just want to give the last message.
Yeah.
I'm very sorry about that. I don't know what must happen.
Don't worry, I'm looking into the presentation. I cannot find the presentation now in my email also. I was here, yeah, but
Natalia, the alternative may be that if you share your screen, your desktop in your current computer, then we could see your presentation. Or if you can send again to José-Manuel the presentation.
Sorry, I missed that because I was trying to see if I could send it to myself. Let me, I think I managed. Don't you worry. I think I'll give you the main message. The slides are not really indispensable. It's a pity, but because I was very close to the end. But let me maybe give you the main message, if I may. I was comparing the technology neutral auction, and the message was we get full efficiency here, but we can get very large rents because the low cost technology is being sold at the marginal cost of the high cost technology. If the regulator is choosing the technology specific quotas, then she can play around with the quotas. Why? Because increasing the quota of the high cost technology would increase the price of the high cost technology, but it would allow the regulator to reduce by the same amount the quota for the low cost technology and reduce the price for that technology much more. So sometimes it might be socially efficient to distort those quantities in order to reduce payments, even if that comes at the cost of distorting efficiency. So So the comparison of these two approaches really depends on some of the parameter values. And a very important parameter value is these ex-ante asymmetries between the technologies. As it is very intuitive, if we run an auction with technologies that ex-ante are very symmetric, very different, so think, for instance, of instead of wind and solar that happen to be quite similar, think, for instance, of brown hydrogen and blue hydrogen, that is hydrogen that is being produced with gas, which is much cheaper than hydrogen that is being produced with renewable technologies. Then what would imply is that in the auction, the brown hydrogen would get the very high price of the blue hydrogen, and this would come with the cost of these very high rents. If we separate them, we can play around with these quotas and get a better outcome in terms of reduced public funds. So whether we want to go for a technology neutral or a technology specific approach has to be decided on a case-by-case basis. Why is this important? Well, it is important because, for instance, the current state aid guidelines, they say that whenever we give support to low carbon technologies, it has to be through a technology neutral approach, no matter what, okay? And if those of you who are familiar with the debate in competition policy, there's always been a traditional tension between the blacklist measures, that is people who were advocating for having a blacklist of things that should not be done, versus the economist approach of an effect-based approach saying, you know, different instruments might be good in some cases and not as good as in others. So instead of having, thank you so much.
Yeah.
If you just go down to the last two, then I'll show you the figure and we can finish here. I'll keep on going, go to 3. Excellent. No, the next figure, I'm gonna show you just the figure because it's gonna be clearer. No, up. No. 26, I think.
This is 26?
No, this is 27. It has to be a figure with colors.
Here?
No, before. This one, perfect.
Yeah, okay.
So probably this figure allows me to summarize what I was saying. So if you remember, the allocation with the technology neutral approach was the one in black. You know, Q1 and Q2N, that was the allocation of the technology neutral approach. What is the optimal allocation of the technology specific approach? Is represented by the blue lines. So Q2S is to the left, that is for the high cost technology, in this case wind, for instance, we are procuring more than would be optimal from a pure cost minimization perspective. Why? Because we are making up the difference by procuring less of technology 1. As you can see, this increases the price of technology 2. So it means that we are increasing the payments to technology 2, but this allows us to reduce the price for technology 1 and therefore save much more than the increase in the payments for technology 2. So the savings are denoted by this light gray area, whereas the extra payments are denoted by this dark gray area. So by distorting the allocation, we've managed to reduce payments overall. So depending on the parameter values, this reduction in the payments is much stronger than the cost in terms of the lost efficiency, which implies that sometimes we might be better off going for technology neutrality. So let me stop here. The message for the Spanish case is that by mixing this technology neutral approach with the minimum quotas, somehow the regulator was doing a very wise approach. It was getting closer to the optimal mechanism because somehow it was committing to a hybrid between the two. So by setting these minimum quotas, the allocation would at least be technology specific in the worst case scenario. If the costs turn out to be closer to each other as initially expected, then the outcome would be technology neutral, and precisely technology neutrality is good when the costs are not that different from each other. So I have to say that the regulator surprised us with a much nicer design than even the ones that we were considering, which are the mechanisms that regulators worldwide are using in practice. So in a nutshell, to wrap up the whole discussion, we've agreed on the energy transition. We've agreed on the objectives, but there's many nitty-gritty details, and we know that the devil is hidden in the details. So in order to get there by 2050, we can follow many different routes. From the macro perspective of whether we want to go for a degrowth strategy or for a decoupling strategy, to the micro level of whether we want to design mechanisms one way or another. So I think these are exciting times for economies working in the field of climate change, energy transition. This is a very broad field, as you know, that encompasses many different approaches. All of these approaches are needed because this is an important problem that we have to tackle, and the way we do it, how we design it, from the policy side to the market design level is gonna be critical to get it right, and therefore to succeed in this very important challenge. So for those of you who are starting your research, I invite you. It would be great to add your forces to this very important field. Not only it is relevant policy-wise, I also think that it provides very interesting research opportunities with great questions and lots of data for those of you who are doing empirical work.
Okay, thank you very much, Natalia. Now it's time for a couple of questions because we are on of time. Ricardo Flores, I think that he wants to make a question. Ricardo?
Hello, thank you for the very good presentation, Natalia. Just some broad questions that were, I mean, maybe a bit apart from the specific presentation that you made. On decarbonizing the economy and and the green energies, do you think there's any role left for nuclear energy, for nuclear power energy? That's one question. A second question, still with energy generation. Well, all this discussion was about energy generation, but at the beginning you were also talking about the pollution generated by transportation and in particular aviation. So you could produce a clean energy, but then applying them in precise industries and in particular in transportation is not evident, at least in the short medium run. So that's another like caveat, if you want. These two questions are about producing energy and applying this energy that is produced, this clean energy. And on the last part on your presentation about procurement, you were referring to the Spanish case. To which extent this could be applied to developing economies? I mean, how do you assess the need of having some structures or implementation structures to be able to have such a procurement system? Okay, so these are my questions. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. So very quick, because we could be discussing about each of these questions for an hour, each of them.
I know that.
Nuclear power, I think, is out of the picture. The investment cost of nuclear are huge as compared to the still declining cost of renewables. So compare the 25 euro megawatt hour that we have just seen in the Spanish auction versus the 100 plus pounds that the British government is paying to the new nuclear station in Hinkley Point. So one thing is that the existing nuclear that is already built and therefore whose costs are already sunk can play a role until they are phased out. That's very different as compared to investing in additional nuclear now, when we have the renewable technologies that from the cost side, even if we take into account the need to invest in backup resources to counteract their intermittency, it's nuclear is out of the picture, I would say. And I'm not the one saying this. You know, there's International Energy Agency or the Lazard Bank, you know, many different institutions that are pointing out that from the cost perspective, nuclear doesn't play a role. So it's not a matter of liking or disliking nuclear or being very risk averse about a nuclear accident. Simply taking into account investment cost, it doesn't pay. The second question was regarding the use of auctions in developing countries.
The second was about applying the clean energy that is generated to industries where it's not so obvious, like transportation.
Yeah, that's clear. That is going to be a big challenge. So we are thinking about ground transportation. It seems that electric vehicles now they are gaining momentum, and those will be using electricity. But still, we have to deal with long distance transportation, say trucks, and we have to deal with airplanes. It seems, I'm not an expert in the technology field, but it seems that part of the solution will come through hydrogen. And there's already some prototypes that are being developed. Clearly, more has to be done in this direction, but it seems that that's the direction where people, at least they think things will go. So the European Commission has a hydrogen strategy. The Spanish government has a hydrogen strategy. Through the recovery fund, many hydrogen projects are going to be developed. All those projects are for producing hydrogen. But it's true that not only we have to be concerned about how to produce hydrogen, but also about how to produce the machinery and the equipment that are going to be consuming that hydrogen. So if we are talking about airplanes, we need to develop hydrogen airplanes, right? So this is something that is not as obvious that is going to be happening in the short term. But what is for sure is that in order to produce hydrogen, we need to consume electricity. And in order to produce electricity in a cheap way, so that hydrogen can be sufficiently cheap to make use of it, we have to invest in renewables, and we have to design our regulatory mechanisms in such a way that electricity prices really reflect the cost of producing electricity out of these cheap resources, without including any additional rents that firms can get through market power, for instance. So it's a holistic approach. We cannot talk about one thing without the other. That was an excellent question. Thank you. And about developing countries, I don't think that building up an auction is so difficult. And at the same time, auctions allow to procure things with certainty and reducing the risk of rent seeking. And I guess that rent seeking is might be a problem in developing countries. So if anything, I would say that auctions, I would say they are welcome everywhere, but especially so they should be welcome in developing countries. Auctions also allow us to reduce the rents, if they're well designed, of course, to reduce the rents that investors get. And therefore, with the same amount of limited resources, if we manage to get competitive prices through auctions, we'll be able to make most out of the public funds that we invest, which is certainly something also very relevant for the developing countries. Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Natalia. We have a last word. Juan Antonio Duro wants to say something. Juan Antonio, please.
Okay, thank you. I will be very quickly because I think that we are so late. I'm sorry because I have lost some of your presentation because I was moving by car from one municipality to another. Anyway,
don't worry, you are not the only one. We also lost the presentation at some point.
Oh, sorry. A very quick question because I think that I show this slide in your first part of the presentation. You put the main carbon emissions pathways by the different components until 2050, I think. And if I realize well, for example, the component from food more or less is maintained. So the relationship between food and carbon emissions more or less is stable. And I don't know if this component can play a different role in terms of the decarbonization pathways, because if we reduce or if we increase the decoupling between food and carbon emission, maybe we can reduce the pressure from the other carbon emissions carriers, you know, for example, transport and this type of thing. I don't know what can be the strategy in terms of this component, because this component maybe we have, you know, we have convinced about any reduction. I don't know.
Yeah, so let me first say that the first figure was a simple illustration. So it was not reflecting, say, the Green Deal strategy. It was just an illustration of how things could go, and certainly this path will differ across countries. The second caveat is that I'm not an expert at all about emissions from food. So please forgive me, but in general, I kind of share your view that if we all become vegetarians and therefore reduce the use of consumption of meat, which is a carbon emitter, then this would be an additional source of emission reduction. But I'm not an expert, so my opinion is just the opinion of a newspaper reader, other than anything more deeper.
Okay, thank you so much, Natalia. We finished the keynote talk of the YPDG now. So thank you again, Natalia, for your attendance to the workshop and for your talk. And now we have a little break because we should start the next session at 10:30, and I think that since we are at home, everybody, and we can have these 5 minutes just to make this little break. So thank you again.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure. I really apologize for this technical issue.
Don't worry.
And I'll see you during the...
Okay,
Thanks.
see you.
Thank you, Natalia. See you.
Thank you. Thank you, Natalia.